Good morning, friends. In this session, we will have some introduction to a very well-known text. The name is very well known to you. The name is Bhagavad Gita. This book, you see, whenever you listen to this name, you will recall a huge volume which you might have seen with your parents or grandparents. Bhagavad Gita, the moment I mention the name, you will recall a huge volume so which is there in the Almirah, which is very respectfully kept there, which is say kept there but not read most of the time. So that sort of book is Bhagavad Gita. But then let us know as to what exactly is its importance. This Bhagavad Gita is the main religious text for the Hindus. This probably I might have told earlier in the earlier sessions, but now with particular reference to this Gita, we have to know that this is the most important religious text for the Hindus. Just as the Bible is for Christians, the Quran is for the Muslims, so like that, this is also the most important book. But the difference between the difference is that the Bible is said to be some text which is a revelation to a person called Jesus, a prophet, a person who had some communication, some contact with the divine beings, with the God himself. And similarly in Quran, the prophet, he had some communication with the divine angel. So that is how the books, they are established or they have come into being. That is, a person known as a prophet or as the Son of God, he says that he has got some revelation, he has heard the voice of the God, and then I am communicating this to all of you, you have to obey. And then all the people, of course, they do listen and then they do obey. That is a question of belief. So somebody who has seen God or claimed to have seen God, he says, yes, this is what is the commandment of God, these are the God's orders, this is how we have to conduct ourselves. And then all the people, they said, okay, fine, we'll obey. So that is the thing there. The difference here is, this is not a book which is God given. This is not something which is revealed to somebody, say like a prophet or somebody like that. This is actually a passage. This Bhagavad Gita is not an independent text, but a small passage in a very huge epic called Mahabharata, with 100,000 verses in that. 100,000 verses, if you see even the text, it is 2-3 times more than the whole complete works of Shakespeare. So it is so huge. So in that voluminous text, this is a small passage of 700 verses. 700 out of 100,000 verses. So it is a small passage, and if you type all these 700 verses, it will fit into, say, about 50 pages. You can come to that slide. So it comes to about 50 printed pages. And then what is the importance? Why is it called the most important text for us? In earlier sessions, I have explained as to what are our primary texts and what are our secondary texts. The primary text, the most primary texts are the Vedas, the most primary texts, because they are the things which are supposed to be revelations for various sages, not one sage but several sages who were contemplating on the nature of truth, nature of ultimate reality, and then they discovered certain formulae, say for human conduct in this world, and how he has to know, how he has to realize himself, and what exactly is the meaning of realization, etc., etc. All these things, they are the revelations in the form of some mantras, in the form of some descriptions, and then in the form of some description about various yajnas, etc. So we have seen these Vedas, and we have also seen that the concluding portions of the Vedas are called the Upanishads. The concluding portions are the end portions. The Veda end. Veda end is called Anta. End and Anta are one and the same. Vedanta. So these are also called Upanishads. The last portions of the Vedas are the end portions of the Vedas. They are the most primary texts. And basing on that, one sage called Badarayana or sage Vyasa, we do not know who exactly it is, whether Badarayana and Vyasa is one and the same, we need not bother about it. He wrote one thing called Brahma Sutra. That is, to examine various statements in these Upanishads and then establish that there is a unity of thought in all these things. So that is a great work done by one person called Badarayana. in the text called Brahma Sutra. Even that is a very complicated text. Vedas themselves are rather difficult texts, very abstruse. Unless you have got some commentary, you will not understand. And then this Brahma Sutra again is so terse. It is in the form of certain formulae. And if you are writing a formula, you are choosing words and then you are making it as brief as possible. Very, very brief. Brevity is the soul of wit, as they say. So it is so brief and it needs explanation. So those two texts are very difficult. So this text, this particular passage which is occurring in Mahabharata is one passage where the teaching of the Upanishads, the whole teaching of the Upanishads is almost condensed and kept in a very simple form. It is condensed and kept in a simple form. So that is why it is called a summary of all the Upanishads. It is treated as a summary of all the Upanishads. So in fact there is a story also. All the Upanishads are compared to cows. Not exactly story, it is a metaphorical statement. All the Upanishads are compared to cows, and then the milkman is Lord Krishna, because the Krishna is the person who is narrating, who is telling this particular message to another, to his friend Arjuna in this text. So Arjuna is supposed to be the calf. A calf is the beneficiary, isn't it? Calf, the milkman takes the calf to the cow. So all the Upanishads are like the cows, all the cows. Arjuna is like the calf. Of course, we are all in the place of Arjuna, and then we are also like the cows, we are also partaking the milk. And then of course Arjuna is the first recipient of that milk. So Krishna is the milkman who gives that milk, and then we are all sharing that milk. So that is a small comparison or a metaphorical way in which this book has been described. So this book is in the form of a dialogue between two people, a master and a student, we can say. They are initially friends, but two friends, they can become master and student, because one friend is so wise, the other friend is always seeking guidance from him. So this other friend becomes a student to this other man. So that is how they transform in the course of the text. That is how you see the transformation. In the course of Gita, we see that. So this is the dialogue between two people. Both are family men. They are not people who have renounced the world. They are people who are men of action, as we say. Man of action and man of contemplation, we say. They are both men of action. They are both, warriors. They are both having kingdoms, their own kingdoms. Arjuna is a ruler, and Krishna himself, he is also a Yadava king. So like that, they are people who are fully engaged in the human life. And the difference is, Krishna is the reincarnation. He is the incarnation of the divine. He is the incarnation of Vishnu. So his duty is to establish dharma. This concept of avatara, I think we discussed in an earlier session also, concept of avatara, that is God incarnating as a human being in order to establish order in society. So that is what we have seen earlier. So Krishna is that. And Arjuna, he is like us, he is the common man. And Arjuna is faced with a moral dilemma there. Are you on that, first one? Yeah. Arjuna is facing a sort of moral dilemma. And the dilemma is about the war, about the morality of the war, and about his own dharma. Should I do this? Should I go ahead with this war? In this war I am going to kill so many people. So much of calamity is going to take place. So, but then Arjuna is not merely an individual. Arjuna is representing the state. Just as the state has got a responsibility to establish order in society, and if necessary the state has to go to war with another neighboring state. So Arjuna's responsibility to establish dharma is to establish order. So that is what Krishna says by giving a broad picture of what exactly is human life. Why Krishna is discussing all this at the battlefield. So you see, this is, as I said, this text is a sort of dialogue, is a sort of conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. And in this conversation, Krishna is telling about what is the supreme reality. Krishna is telling about what is the human being, what is the nature of not only human being but all beings, all jiva, all beings, and what exactly is this creation. And then what is the relationship between this jiva, this individual, and the divine? And then ultimately he is also saying that individual is nothing but that particular divine. And then, this is how this whole discussion goes. Why should this discussion be there in the beginning of a battlefield? So a question may arise. The point is, Krishna is trying to give him a big picture. Krishna is giving him a broad picture of what is the human, life, what are the basic, what is dharma, and what is dharma for Kshatriya. Kshatriya means a warrior, a king. What is the dharma of a king? So the dharma of a king is different from the dharma of another, sage. The dharma of a sage is totally different. Dharma of a sage is to totally renounce and then give up all desires and all such things. Dharma of a king is to fight if necessary, is to establish order, is to establish dharma. So that is what is the picture. So that is what is the background to Gita. We come to the next slide. If you see the next slide, this point I told you, this is the main religious text for Hindus, And then another point which we have to note here is that usually in all these religious texts, there is a narration. There is a narration of how, this God has revealed to this gentleman called a prophet or a son of God, and then how how this gentleman started propagating, how this naturally the disciples and all such people came, and how people the believers on one side and non-believers on the other, and then the clashes between the believers and non-believers. So it is a sort of narrative which goes on and on. So that is what we find in the religious texts. But here the structure is totally different. The structure is totally, it has nothing to do with this believers, non-believers, etc. Straight away in the very this Bhagavad Gita, this 700 slokas are divided into 18 small chapters. Each chapter is having about 30, 40, 50 verses. It varies, 30, 40, 50 verses, and altogether 18 chapters, the 700 slokas are contained. So here, in these chapters, Krishna is telling about, in this thing, Krishna is giving a picture about what is the nature of the human being. The whole structure of the Gita, if some people have analyzed, and then they have seen that out of these 18 chapters, if you make them into 3 parts, the first 6 they talk about the jiva, the individual. Any jiva means not merely a human being, starting from a small amoeba, starting from a small bacteria, right up to a big dinosaur, and right up to the divine beings which we talk of. So all these things, they are the jivas. And then the second, the next 6 chapters, that is 7th to 12th, they talk about the nature of the Supreme Reality. What is the Supreme Reality? It is of the nature of consciousness, it is of the nature of existence, consciousness and infinity. And then the Supreme Reality is manifesting in we are talking at 2 levels. One which is called the absolute level, and one we call it the empirical level. Absolute level, we are talking of the Supreme Reality as pure consciousness which has no connection with anything. It has no doership in it. It does not even create. It is not even the creator. What we call the creator or God or empirical God or somebody who gives reward and punishment or somebody who incarnates as a human being and establishes order, all that thing are at the level of a secondary level which is called an empirical level. That empirical level of God is what we refer to as normal God. So it is this, what is that, the Supreme Reality which is called Nirguna. Nirguna means which is devoid of any type of characteristics, which is not having any attributes. You can't say that is the creator. It is not having any doership in that. It is untouched by anything. So that sort of thing is called, that is an entity. And we don't even call that Nirguna Brahma as a he. We call it as it. That also we have seen in earlier sessions. So this Nirguna Brahma is different. And what we call the God with attributes, somebody whom we call the creator, sustainer, destroyer, whatever it is, all these things, they are the Saguna level, or this is the secondary level, or at the empirical level. So this Nirguna Brahma and Saguna Brahma, this Nirguna level and Saguna level, these are the two levels which are being told in the, say this, the middle portion, the middle 6 chapters. The final 6 chapters, they talk about, again, to various practices which the human being has to do in order to realize that his nature is not different from that supreme thing. The ultimate message of Vedanta is that the individual is not different from the supreme reality. Our religion does not say call a man as a sinner. Our religion says, man, you are by forgetting yourself. By mistake, you are considering yourself to be a very, very limited personality. By mistake, you are considering yourself to be bound in so many things. You please get rid of all those bondages, get rid of all those shackles, and then realize your freedom. And this freedom is what is called liberation. This freedom is called what is called moksha. So what the Vedanta says is that the individual is not different from the supreme reality. So this sort of realization, it cannot happen to every man. It cannot happen to you and me if we are very, very busy in our office, busy with our work, busy with our say environment, busy with so many attachments, busy with so many tasks and say targets and ambitions, hatreds and love, hatred, desire and so many things. All these notions which are binding us, which are there accumulated in our mind, these things have to gradually weaken. So this realization is a process of self-purification. So this thing, what is how to purify oneself, what is the right behavior, what are called gunas, what is the right behavior, and then what is the sattvika, rajasa, tamasa, pravrutti, and what is called shraddha. So all these things, they are described in the last 6 chapters, and then of course the last chapter, 18th chapter, it gives almost a summary of the whole message of Gita. So this is how this structure is there. And another point which you have to notice, it is, as I said, it is not the second, are you on the second slide? It is not historical in nature, as I said, because it does not narrate the clashes between the believers, non-believers, etc., etc. But it is philosophical. Philosophical means it is pure enquiry. It is not a belief system, but a pure enquiry. Enquiry means, what is mind? How has this mind come into existence? What are my, say, sense organs? What are my senses? What is the relationship between the senses which I have and the external world? What is the relationship between my mind and the external world? So this is an enquiry. And then this external world which we see, is it real? So that is again a very important question. Druk and Drushya, all those things, the seer and the seen. So many types of analysis, so many types of points of view this textbook gives. And for a general reader, we can say that this tells about 2 types of dharma. That is the life of action and life of contemplation, life of renunciation. A life of action, Krishna calls it pravrutti dharma. Pravrutti dharma is, that is, if you want to be successful in life, not only successful but also be happy. Mere success is not enough. You may be very successful, but you may be full of tensions. You may be having blood pressure, you may be having sugar and so many problems. A happy and successful life, if you want to have, what should be your attitude to work? So that is the philosophy of work. The philosophy of work is what is told in this life of action. And then this life of renunciation. If you are on the path of knowledge, which is actually the superior path, life, in fact, there are only 2 paths. One is the path of action and the path of renunciation. All people cannot renounce, and then all people cannot become monks. 99.9% of the people are in this world. So this Gita relates to all of them. But Gita also tells about what is the highest goal. In the earlier session, we talked about Purushartha, what are the human goals. Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. This Dharma, Artha and Kama are the things which are dealt with in this so-called Pravrutti Dharma. That is man of action. For the man of action, they are the relevant things. For the man of renunciation, that Moksha is the last goal, final goal which is relevant. So that is what we saw in that. Please come to the next slide. So this subject matter, I told you, it is twofold. As I said, it is about the God, it is about the Pravrutti Dharma and Nivrutti Dharma. And then in this process, the methodology is the text is analyzing what is the nature of human being in the initial chapters, and then it is analyzing what is the nature of the divine in the next 6 chapters, and the equation between these two, the individual and the divine, the equation between these two in the last 6 chapters. There is a very famous statement in the Upanishads, that you are, Tattvamasi. Tattvamasi means that you are. That means that refers to the supreme reality. You refers to the individual. You are that. You are not different from that. So that is what that Chandogya Upanishad, it says 9 times. Tattvamasi, Tattvamasi Shveta Keto. It says Tattvamasi Shveta Keto. Like that it says 9 times. So such statements which establish the unity of the individual and the divine, they are discussed here. And then analysis of human action, and then suggestion about our attitude to action. So this again we have seen in the earlier chapters, earlier sessions. In the earlier sessions I talked about Nishkama Karma, or what is called Karma Yoga. So you see, we are all engaged in various types of actions. And the philosophy of action, the principle of action is, or rather the formula, let us say, of action is, every action, it also gives a result. Every action, whether good or bad, it gives a result. Of course, it refers to, I am broadly referring to, say, all types of actions. That is, an action like coming to office. You are coming to office and working here, and you are getting a paycheck. That is, so there is an action, there is a result of that action. But in the context of, say, self-enquiry, we are not talking about that. In the context of self-enquiry, we are talking about some rituals, religious activities which are supposed to give you some merit, the positive merit called punya, and religious activities which are certain activities which are prohibited. We are talking about certain commended actions and talking about certain prohibited actions. So these are the actions we are referring to when we use the word action or karma. For action, the Sanskrit word is karma. So this karma, what should be your attitude to karma? So that is what is examined here. And if every action gives a result also, and then that result is in the form of another life, and the ultimate goal being to come out of this cycle of say birth and death, then how should one perform an action? One has to perform action in such a way that he does not get the fruit of that action. So that means he has to merely do an action, but he should not seek the result. You are doing your action as a duty. You are doing your action as a duty to the universal self. You are doing it as an order from the Lord, as the text says. You are doing it for Loka Sangraha, as Krishna says in the text. Loka Sangraha means for the welfare of humanity. You are doing it as individuals' contribution to the society or to the cosmic say whole. So that is the attitude which a person should have if he has to get rid of, or if he has to avoid the fruit of that action, which is the rebirth. So this man doing a ritual, doing some punya and then getting a rebirth, so that goes on eternally. So that eternal cycle one has to break off, and that breaking it off is what is called freedom or realization or moksha. So for that, the person should have this particular attitude to action. Then analysis of supreme reality is another thing which this text does. And then this process of self-enquiry, the jiva discovers that he is not different from the Brahman. Then this process of self-enquiry is also described in the text. Then come to the next slide. An important thing which we have to note in this Gita is that it is not merely a sort of intellectual pursuit. You see, at the end of the Gita, okay, you have known what is Jiva and what is Brahma. And then of course the text also says that Jiva is Brahma. And then the last 6 chapters, they also tell about what practices a person has to do. It is not a mere intellectually, it is not knowing certain facts intellectually. It is a question of practicing them. So that is why the whole there are so many chapters in Gita which are dedicated for this practice. Repeatedly it talks about abhyasa. Abhyasa means practice. Particularly the 6th chapter, it talks about the abhyasa of yoga. All these Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which are all the practices which are there, Ashtanga Yoga and things like that, they are all described there. How a person has to, say, discipline himself. Number one, the Karma Yoga, it talks about, our attitude to karma. Karma Yoga talks about our attitude, what should be our attitude to the work we do. And then, Karma Yoga is one means. Then, self-discipline by way of this yoga, that is another means. That is described in the 6th chapter, which is called Atma Sanyama Yoga. That is, the very name indicates, it is a chapter for self-discipline. So there, it tells about how a person has to slowly avoid all these dualities like love, hatred, anger, all these things slowly, how he has to discipline his mind. So those courses, they are told there. And then, in addition to this karma and yoga, bhakti is another means. Bhakti means devotion to the God. So that is again described in, the Gita. So these are the strategies for self-purification which are told in the Gita. Then again, Gita analyzes human nature from another point of view. That is, the sattva, rajas and tamo guna. These three things also we discussed earlier in the earlier sessions. What is sattva? And this sattva guna produces certain characteristics in a human being. Rajo guna produces some other characteristics. Tamo guna produces some other characteristics. And how this person endowed with these characteristics. Every man is a mixture of all these three. It is not as though one person is 100% sattva, another person is 100% rajo guna, and another man 100% tamo guna and a devilish person. It is not like that. Every human being, not only human being, everything on earth, everything sentient, insentient, everything on earth is a mixture of these three gunas. So that is what it says, that is what the Vedanta says. And then how to get over these gunas. These gunas, they define your nature. In fact, they determine your nature. And then according to that nature we keep on functioning. Then how to get over those gunas and how to become divine in the process. How to become divine. So that is the process of self-purification, means getting over all the bad effects of these gunas. Bad and also good effects. You see, sattva also is not desirable. Sattva leads to punyam. Punyam leads to some sort of heavenly life. Even that is not desirable, because heavenly life again is a bondage. After that heavenly life, again a man comes back to earth and then he has to again do some action. So it is not a release from this cycle of birth and death. So how to get over all these gunas, that again is discussed here in this. So it is a sort of how to do it guide. Let us say to tell in a very, very brief way, Gita is a sort of how to do it guide for spiritual progress. What we call spiritual progress. Spiritual progress is, what is spiritual progress? Not worshipping God for a particular benefit, not worshipping God as a sort of petitioner, not a petitionary approach. It is self-enquiry is basically to analyze what is my nature, what is myself, what exactly is the meaning of I. So who am I or what am I? So these questions, they constitute this enquiry, and this self-enquiry is what is called spiritual progress. So this then again, the self-enquiry, when we use the word self-enquiry, we should be very careful to understand that self-enquiry is not some sort of selfish enquiry. The result of this self-enquiry is that the individual realizes that he is one with the entire universe. The individual realizes that he is one with the entire universe. He has a responsibility to the universe. Like Krishna repeatedly says in the Gita, he has got a responsibility, that is Loka Sangraha. So he has got a responsibility, and his body-mind complex, which can be called this tiny speck in this whole universe, which is something like a microcosm in this huge macrocosm. This microcosm is not different from that macrocosm. So he realizes he realizes that he is not different from the whole world, and then he develops love for all the human beings. So this love for all human beings, not only human beings, all beings, love for all other beings is a result of the philosophical understanding. So the ultimate effect of Gita is self-realization, and self-realization is not a selfish pursuit. The important point which we have to remember is self-realization is not a selfish pursuit. In fact, it is to eradicate one's own ego. It is to dissociate from one's own limited ego, and it is to identify with a larger self called the entire humanity. I does not mean my own self. I means the whole humanity. So which means that I am able to love every being as I love myself. So this is ultimately the message of Gita. We'll continue next. Thank you.